Isaac was 68, a retired high school history teacher who had spent most of his life in a quiet coastal town. His days were simple now: morning walks along the pier, afternoons tending to his small vegetable garden, evenings reading old war memoirs by the soft glow of a table lamp. He had always considered himself healthy for his age. A little stiffness in the knees, some occasional fatigue, that was normal, he told himself. But in late spring, something began to change. One Saturday morning, Isaac found himself standing at the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand but frozen in place. His reflection seemed different. His eyes, once bright and sharp, had taken on a faint yellow tint. His skin looked tired, almost sallow. It wasn't a trick of the light. He knew his body well enough to sense when something was wrong. That small, unsettling discovery stirred something deep inside him, a quiet unease that clung to him for the rest of the day. Over the following week, Isaac began to notice other changes. The walk to the pier felt longer, his legs heavier. Meals that once brought joy now left him uncomfortably full, his appetite fading. At night, he would wake with a dull ache beneath his ribs, low and persistent, like a shadow that refused to leave. He told his daughter Sarah during their Sunday phone call, brushing it off with a chuckle. "Just old age catching up to me," he said, but she could hear the hesitation in his voice. Sarah, ever the worrier, insisted he see his family doctor. "Dad, it's probably nothing, but it's better to be sure," she urged. Isaac agreed, though in his heart he felt a growing reluctance. Hospitals were for people who were truly ill, and he didn't see himself that way. Still, the next Tuesday, he drove into town and walked into Dr. Alvarez's clinic, the same doctor who had treated his family for over 2 decades. Dr. Alvarez listened quietly as Isaac described his symptoms, nodding slowly. She ordered blood work and a liver function test, her expression carefully neutral. Isaac left the clinic with a vague unease, telling himself it was just routine. But that evening, as he sat on his porch listening to the waves crash against the shore, he felt the first prick of fear. His mind kept circling back to the word liver. He knew it was important, vital even, but he had never imagined it could fail him. 2 days later, Dr. Alvarez called. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable gravity to it. The test results showed elevated liver enzymes, an indicator that something was stressing or damaging his liver. She asked him to come in the next morning for a more detailed discussion. Isaac hung up the phone slowly, staring at the wall. For the first time in years, he felt truly uncertain about his health. At the appointment, Dr. Alvarez explained that his liver was under strain. "Isaac, I want to talk about your medications," she began gently. He nodded, a bit puzzled. Over the years, Isaac had taken various pills, a daily statin for cholesterol, occasional ibuprofen for his knees, the cold and flu remedies he reached for during winter, and of course, Tylenol when the headaches hit. None of it seemed excessive to him. These were everyday things, trusted and familiar. But Dr. Alvarez's words painted a different picture. She explained how even common, seemingly harmless drugs could injure the liver if taken too often or in the wrong combination. It wasn't about a single pill, it was the slow accumulation over time, like drops of water wearing down stone. "Your liver works tirelessly to filter everything you put into your body," she said, "but even the strongest organ can weaken under constant strain." Isaac listened in silence, his mind drifting back to the yellow in his eyes, the heaviness in his body. He thought about his medicine cabinet at home, stocked with bottles and blister packs collected over the years. Some had been there so long he'd forgotten why he'd bought them. The idea that those same pills could be quietly undermining his health unsettled him deeply. Driving home from the clinic, Isaac felt a mix of emotions: confusion, frustration, and a quiet sense of betrayal. He had trusted those little white tablets, believing they were helping him. Now he wondered if they had been slowly harming him all along. The road home wound along the coastline, waves shimmering in the afternoon sun, but the beauty of the day barely touched him. His thoughts were fixed on the quiet, unseen work of the liver and how fragile that work could be. That evening, Isaac pulled out a small wooden box from the top of his wardrobe. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a folded list written in his late wife's handwriting. It was a reminder of a time when health meant fresh food, morning walks, and simple living. He felt a pang of longing for that clarity, that sense of control over his own well-being. He made himself a promise: no more blind trust in pills, no more ignoring the quiet warnings from his body. If his liver was struggling, he would find a way to help it, to lighten its load. He didn't yet know exactly how, but he was determined to learn. And so Isaac's journey began, not just to heal his liver, but to understand it, to uncover the hidden dangers in everyday habits, the silent risks in the things we take for granted. In the days to come, he would face uncomfortable truths, unexpected discoveries, and the difficult work of changing long-held routines. But that evening, as he watched the sun dip below the horizon, he felt something new stirring within him, a quiet determination, a readiness to take back control of his health. Isaac stood in his kitchen the morning after his appointment with Dr. Alvarez, staring at the open medicine cabinet as though it were a stranger he'd just met. The familiar shapes and colors of pill bottles and blister packs didn't bring comfort anymore. They seemed different now, more ominous somehow, each one holding a quiet question. Have I been trusting you too much? He reached for a small amber bottle of Tylenol, rolling it in his palm. He thought about the headaches that had crept in over the years, the nights he couldn't sleep from knee pain, the winter colds that had left him reaching for relief. He had never thought twice about taking a few tablets. But Dr. Alvarez's voice echoed in his head. Even the safest seeming medications can hurt you if you're not careful. That warning kept playing in his mind as he brewed his coffee. He thought of his late wife, Marianne, and how she'd always been meticulous about reading labels. She used to tease him for swallowing pills without checking the instructions. "You trust too easily, Isaac," she'd say with a half smile. Now he wondered if she had been right all along. His daughter Sarah had grown up watching her mother's cautious habits. Maybe that's why she was so quick to push him toward the doctor when his symptoms appeared. He smiled faintly at the thought. Sarah had inherited her mother's stubborn streak. Later that afternoon, Isaac sat on the porch, the Tylenol bottle still in his hand. He remembered the first time he'd started using it regularly. It was during his final years of teaching, when long hours at a desk left his back sore and his head throbbing. A colleague had kept a bottle in her desk drawer and swore by it. "It's harmless if you don't overdo it," she'd said. Back then, overdoing it meant taking more than 6 in a day. Isaac never did that, at least not often, but looking back, he realized he might have taken them far more frequently than he should have, sometimes several days in a row. Dr. Alvarez had been clear. The liver processes acetaminophen, Tylenol's main ingredient, and if too much builds up, it creates a toxic byproduct. Even healthy livers can struggle with that load, but for someone his age, the risk was higher. She told him about patients who'd landed in the hospital, yellow-skinned and gravely ill, simply because they had taken too much without realizing it. He could still picture her serious expression when she said, "One overdose can be enough to cause permanent damage." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the small lemon tree by his porch. Isaac thought of all the times he'd brushed aside small aches and pains, telling himself it was just part of getting older. He had never paused to wonder whether the way he treated those aches might be slowly wearing down the very organ working so hard to protect him. It wasn't just about pain relief anymore, it was about trust. The quiet, unexamined trust he'd placed in those little white pills was beginning to feel like a mistake. That evening, Sarah called again. "Dad, how are you feeling today?" she asked, her voice gentle but probing. He hesitated. "I'm thinking," he admitted. She waited. "About what the doctor said, about my medicine cabinet, about all the times I thought I was helping myself when maybe I was doing the opposite." Sarah didn't rush to fill the silence. "Well," she said finally, "thinking is a good place to start, but you have to follow it with action." Her words lingered long after the call ended. Isaac knew she was right. That night, he went through the cabinet, reading each label carefully. He was startled by how many contained acetaminophen, not just Tylenol, but cold remedies, flu syrups, even some nighttime sleep aids. He realized he had been taking different products for different symptoms without noticing they all shared the same ingredient. The thought made his stomach tighten. The next morning, he returned to Dr. Alvarez with a small bag of the medications from his home. She spread them out on her desk like cards in a game. "See here," she said, pointing to the fine print on each label. "Acetaminophen, acetaminophen, acetaminophen." She tapped her pen on the table. "It's easy to double or triple your dose without realizing it. That's why we call it a silent risk." Isaac listened carefully as she explained safer ways to manage occasional pain, alternating different types of medication when necessary, giving his liver days of rest between doses, and finding non-drug methods to ease discomfort. "Think of your liver like the hardest working teacher in the school," she said with a small smile, knowing his background. You can't keep giving them extra classes without a break. Sooner or later, they'll burn out. That image stuck with him. As he walked home from the clinic, he thought about his own years in the classroom, the times he had stayed late to grade papers or help struggling students. He had been proud of his stamina then, but even he had needed holidays to recover. Maybe his liver needed the same respect. Over the next few days, Isaac tried something new. Instead of automatically reaching for Tylenol at the first sign of a headache, he made tea and lay down with a cool cloth over his eyes. When his knees ached, he took a slow walk along the shore to keep them moving gently. He noticed that not every ache demanded a pill, and that sometimes, with patience, the discomfort eased on its own. One evening, as the sun sank low over the ocean, Isaac felt a quiet sense of relief. He wasn't cured, and his liver still needed time, but he had taken the first step. He had opened his eyes to the truth hidden in his medicine cabinet and decided to change. And though the road ahead would require discipline and vigilance, he knew he wasn't walking it alone. Sarah's concern, Dr. Alvarez's guidance, and his own renewed determination would guide him. The Tylenol bottle now sat at the back of the cabinet, still within reach, but no longer a reflex. It was a small shift, but to Isaac, it felt like reclaiming a measure of control over his health. And with that, he knew the journey had truly begun. Isaac had always thought of his liver as something distant, abstract, an invisible part of his body that did its work without complaint. He couldn't remember ever feeling it, not the way you feel your heart race after a brisk walk or your stomach growl before lunch. But after Dr. Alvarez's warning, it was as if he could sense it now, quietly toiling away under his ribs. He began to picture it as a steadfast friend, working day and night to clean up after him, no matter what he ate, drank, or swallowed in pill form. The image filled him with both gratitude and guilt. He started reading about the liver in the evenings, the way he used to prepare lessons for his students. He discovered that this unassuming organ had hundreds of tasks: filtering toxins, helping digest food, storing energy, balancing nutrients. And yet, it asked for so little in return. No sharp pangs to announce its fatigue, no dramatic collapse to warn you early. It simply kept going, silently, until the burden became too much. That was what made it dangerous. By the time the signs appeared, yellow skin, swollen belly, relentless fatigue, it was often already struggling. One evening, Sarah stopped by after work, bringing a bag of groceries and a fresh loaf of bread from the bakery. She found her father sitting at the table with a notebook, sketching a simple diagram of the liver he'd found in a library book. "Doing homework?" she teased. Isaac smiled faintly. "Learning about an old friend," he said, tapping the paper. "It's a good listener, doesn't complain much. But I've been taking advantage of it." Sarah listened as he explained what he had learned. She was surprised by his newfound fascination, but also relieved. For years, she had watched him brush aside aches and symptoms, convinced that aging was something to endure, not understand. Now he was asking questions, real questions about his body. "So you're saying it's like a teacher who never takes sick leave?" she asked, trying to use his own analogies. Isaac chuckled. "Exactly. And I've been the careless student who keeps piling work on the teacher's desk." But learning was only the beginning. The real challenge, Isaac realized, was changing habits that had been decades in the making. Pills had always been his shortcut, his way of pushing through a day when his body wanted to slow down. Now, each time he reached for a bottle, he paused, picturing his liver sighing under the weight of yet another task. Sometimes he still took the pill, but more often he chose to wait, to try something else first. On Thursday, he met his old friend George at the cafe by the pier. They had taught together for nearly 20 years and shared countless coffees over stacks of unmarked essays. George ordered his usual black coffee, but Isaac chose herbal tea instead. "Since when did you start drinking that?" George asked. Isaac smiled. "Since I started listening to my liver?" George laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Isaac didn't join in. He told his friend about the test results, the warning signs, the quiet damage that can happen without you knowing. George's face grew serious. "You know," he said slowly, "my brother had liver trouble a few years back. He didn't even drink much, but the doctor said it was the medication he'd been on for his back." That conversation stayed with Isaac. It reminded him that his story wasn't unique, that there were countless others quietly carrying the same risk, unaware. It also deepened his sense of urgency. He wasn't just trying to save himself from harm, he was also learning something that could help people he cared about. He thought about his former students, many now in their 40s and 50s, some surely living with the same blind trust in medicine that he once had. At his next appointment, Isaac told Dr. Alvarez about his research and his new habits. She nodded approvingly, but reminded him that even small, steady changes could take time to show results. "Your liver has a remarkable ability to heal," she said, "but it needs a break from constant strain. Think of it like a sponge. It can absorb a lot, but it needs time to dry out before it can work at its best again." She encouraged him to focus on hydration, gentle exercise, and balanced meals that gave his liver the nutrients it needed to regenerate. Isaac took her words seriously. He swapped his evening glass of wine for water with lemon. He added more leafy greens to his dinner plate, not because he'd read about them in a magazine, but because he understood now that his liver needed them. Each choice felt less like a restriction and more like an act of care toward a friend who had stood by him for decades. One rainy afternoon, Isaac was sitting by the window with a cup of tea when he felt a sudden wave of gratitude. It surprised him. He had never thought much about the hidden parts of his body before. But now, each beat of his heart, each quiet breath, each silent hour of work his liver put in felt like a gift. It made him want to protect it fiercely. He thought about all the years he had taken it for granted, all the times he had masked pain with a pill instead of asking why it was there. That night, as he prepared for bed, Isaac paused in front of the mirror. The faint yellow in his eyes seemed lighter now, though he knew it might be too soon for real change. Still, the difference in his spirit was undeniable. He was no longer ignoring the silent work inside him. He was part of it, aware, engaged, willing to help rather than hinder. And that, he realized, was the beginning of real healing. He turned off the light, feeling a quiet pride in the small steps he'd taken. Tomorrow, there would be more choices to make, some easy, some hard, but each one would be guided by the same truth. The liver suffers in silence, but it can also recover in silence if only you give it the chance. For most of his life, Isaac had thought of his body in simple terms: legs for walking, eyes for seeing, heart for beating. The liver had never made that short list of things he noticed or cared for daily, but now it was all he could think about. Every sip of water, every bite of food, every tablet he considered, he pictured it all passing through that one tireless organ. The image made his decisions feel heavier, more deliberate. One morning, he woke before sunrise, unable to go back to sleep. The sound of the waves was faint in the stillness, and the air carried that clean, salty smell he loved. He made tea and sat by the kitchen window, watching the sky change from dark blue to pale gold. As he sipped, he imagined his liver beginning its day's work, just as he used to prepare his lesson plans before his students arrived. It didn't get weekends off or holidays, it didn't complain, it just kept showing up. Later that week, Sarah invited him to lunch at a small cafe in town. She had noticed the changes in him, the way he read labels now, the way he measured out his choices instead of moving on autopilot. Over a bowl of vegetable soup, she asked, "So, what's your liver been teaching you lately?" Isaac smiled at her playful phrasing. "That it's the most hard-working employee I've ever had," he said, "and that I've been a pretty lousy boss." She tilted her head, curious. "How so?" He leaned in, lowering his voice as though confessing a secret. "I've been giving it too much work, too little support, and no praise at all." Sarah laughed, but she understood. She could see he was speaking from a place of genuine respect. That respect had grown from more than just the doctor's warnings. It had grown from the slow realization that the liver was not just a passive filter, but an active, vital force in keeping him alive. The more he read, the more he learned that it was constantly transforming toxins into harmless substances, balancing his blood sugar, storing vitamins, and even fighting infections. And it did all this without a single conscious command from him. The awareness changed how he moved through his days. He found himself taking shorter walks more often instead of long, exhausting ones that left him aching and tempted to medicate. He kept a pitcher of water on the counter so it was always in sight, reminding him to drink. At the grocery store, he lingered longer in the produce section, picking fruits and vegetables that felt like gifts he could give his liver. Leafy greens, beets, citrus. It wasn't about chasing a fad or following a diet, it was about honoring the work happening quietly inside him. One afternoon, while sorting through old photographs, Isaac found a picture of himself in his early 40s. He was standing at the front of a classroom, chalk in hand, smiling as a group of teenagers leaned forward in their seats. His hair was darker then, his posture straighter, but what struck him most was the lightness in his expression. He remembered those years vividly, the long days, the quick dinners, the late nights grading papers. Back then, he had relied on coffee and whatever was in the medicine cabinet to push through. He had been proud of his endurance. Now he realized that much of that stamina had been borrowed from the very organ he had ignored. At his next checkup, Dr. Alvarez noticed his improved energy and lighter tone. "You're looking better," she said as she scrolled through his latest test results. "Your liver enzymes are still high, but they've come down a little. That's a good sign." Isaac felt a quiet swell of relief. It wasn't a miracle recovery, but it was progress, and progress meant hope. She reminded him that healing was often a slow process, especially for the liver. "It's like tending a garden," she said. "You don't see the roots growing, but the work is happening underneath." On his way home, her words echoed in his mind. He thought about the lemon tree in his yard, how it had taken years before it bore fruit. There had been months when it looked no different, yet something was always happening beneath the soil. His liver, he realized, was doing the same, working invisibly, responding to the care he was finally giving it. That evening, Isaac decided to write down the ways he could be a better boss to his liver. He didn't call them rules, just reminders. Drink water before coffee, rest before reaching for a pill, choose food that nourishes more than it indulges, move his body daily, even if only gently, and perhaps most importantly, keep listening, because the liver might be silent, but the body had other ways of speaking. Some days, the changes felt easy, like slipping into a well-worn sweater. Other days, old habits tugged at him. There were moments when his knees throbbed after gardening and he thought about the quick relief of a tablet. But then he would pause, picture his liver at work, and decide to wait. Sometimes the pain faded on its own, sometimes it didn't. But each time he chose patience over pills, he felt a little stronger, not just in body, but in resolve. The more he leaned into this quiet partnership with his liver, the more connected he felt to his whole self. It wasn't just about avoiding harm anymore. It was about working together, respecting the rhythms and limits of a body that had carried him for nearly 7 decades. And with each day, that respect deepened into something like friendship. Isaac knew there were still lessons ahead. The liver worked non-stop, but so did the challenges that could wear it down. Yet for the first time, he felt ready to meet them, not with fear, but with a steady, deliberate care that matched the constancy of the organ he now valued so deeply. Isaac had taken Tylenol for so many years that it felt like part of his household, as familiar as the kettle on the stove or the chair by the window. It had been there in the medicine cabinet when he was a young teacher pushing through long days, when Marianne was alive and nursing him through winter colds, when knee pain began to whisper in his 50s. Back then, he never thought of it as dangerous. It was simply there, harmless, trusted, but Dr. Alvarez had cracked that trust open during their conversation. The words toxic byproduct and liver injury were still fresh in his mind. She had explained that acetaminophen, the main ingredient in Tylenol, was safe at low doses, but when taken too often or in high amounts, it produced a compound that could quietly poison the liver. "It's not about 1 or 2 tablets," she'd said, her tone even. "It's about the patterns over time, the silent buildup." That thought haunted him. He had always followed what he believed were safe habits, never swallowing a whole handful, never taking more than the bottle recommended. But as he now knew, the danger wasn't always obvious. It was hidden in the overlap. A cold medicine here, a sleep aid there, a couple of Tylenol for his knees, each with its own dose of acetaminophen. One evening, he emptied his medicine cabinet onto the kitchen table. It looked like a small pharmacy. As he picked up each box and bottle, he began to notice the fine print. There it was, again and again, acetaminophen, acetaminophen, acetaminophen. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Had he really been this careless? Not reckless, just unaware. And wasn't that almost worse? The next morning, Sarah dropped by. She found him at the table, still surrounded by bottles and papers. "What's going on here?" she asked, scanning the clutter. Isaac told her what he discovered, his voice low and steady, but tinged with regret. "I've been taking more of this stuff than I realized," he admitted, holding up a Tylenol bottle. "Not at once, but over years. It adds up." Sarah listened quietly, her brow furrowed. "You didn't know," she said softly. Isaac gave a short, bitter laugh. Not knowing doesn't make the damage any less real. Later that week, Isaac returned to Dr. Alvarez with his findings. She laid the bottles out on her desk in neat rows. "This," she said, pointing to the repetition of acetaminophen across different products, "is how good people get into trouble. They're treating different symptoms, pain, cold, flu, sleep problems, without realizing they're doubling or tripling the same ingredient." She told him about patients who had come in with sudden, severe liver failure, people who didn't drink heavily, didn't have hepatitis, but had been using acetaminophen daily for months or years. By the time the symptoms appear, nausea, jaundice, confusion, it's often already serious, she said. Isaac's mind drifted back to the faint yellow in his eyes, the heaviness in his body just weeks earlier. That night, Isaac sat on his porch with a cup of herbal tea, watching the moon rise. The Tylenol bottle was gone from its usual spot in the cabinet. He had tucked it away in a small box at the back of a high shelf. It was still there for emergencies, but it was no longer within easy reach. He thought about how often he had treated minor aches as though they were urgent problems worth medicating immediately. Now he wanted to try a different approach, slowing down, giving his body the chance to handle discomfort naturally before rushing for relief. The first real test came a few days later. His knees throbbed after an afternoon in the garden, bending to pull weeds and plant seedlings. In the past, he would have popped a couple of Tylenol without hesitation. This time he made a cup of ginger tea and settled into his armchair with his legs elevated. The ache didn't vanish instantly, but after an hour, it softened. He realized he could live with it, at least for now. That small victory felt bigger than it should have. Isaac began keeping a small notebook, jotting down when he felt tempted to take Tylenol and what he did instead. Sometimes it was as simple as resting, sometimes a warm compress or a slow walk along the shore. The act of writing it down made him aware of his choices, gave him a sense of control, and each time he avoided the pill, it felt like a quiet gift to his liver. One rainy afternoon, George called. "Heard you've been on a health kick," his friend teased. Isaac chuckled. "Something like that." He explained what he had learned about Tylenol and the liver, about how easy it was to take more than you realized. George grew thoughtful. "You know," he said slowly, "my niece ended up in the hospital last year. Flu turned bad. She was taking all kinds of cold medicine and Tylenol. Nearly lost her liver. She's fine now, but scary stuff." That story reinforced what Isaac had been feeling, that this wasn't just his problem. It was a quiet danger hiding in plain sight, in nearly every home, in the medicine cabinets of people who thought they were being sensible. It wasn't about fear-mongering, it was about paying attention. At his next visit, Dr. Alvarez smiled when she saw his notebook. "You're becoming your own best advocate," she said. "That's the kind of patient who heals best." She reminded him that occasional use was fine, but that his new awareness would help prevent the kind of cumulative damage that had brought too many patients to her door. As Isaac left the clinic, the spring air felt fresher, the sun a little warmer. He knew he hadn't solved everything, not yet. His liver still had healing to do, and his habits were still evolving. But he had faced the truth about a medicine he had trusted for decades, and now, every time he saw that little white tablet, he would think twice, not out of fear, but out of respect for the silent worker inside him that deserved better. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon when Isaac found himself sitting across from Dr. Alvarez again, notebook in hand. Rain streaked the clinic windows, blurring the outline of the street outside. He had been thinking about something she'd mentioned in passing during their last conversation, the phrase toxic byproduct. It had lodged itself in his mind like a splinter. He wanted to understand it, not in the way a medical textbook might explain it, but in plain words he could carry with him. Dr. Alvarez leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. "Your liver is like the town's waste processing plant," she began, her voice calm and deliberate. "Everything you eat, drink, or swallow as medicine gets sent there for processing. Most of the time, it does a beautiful job, filters out the bad, keeps the good, sends the clean back into circulation. But acetaminophen is tricky. When your liver breaks it down, most of it turns into harmless substances your body can get rid of. But a small portion, just a sliver, turns into something toxic. Your body can neutralize it if the dose is small. But if you take too much, too often, your liver can't keep up. That toxic sliver starts to pile up, and that's when damage begins." Isaac nodded slowly. He liked the waste plant image. It made sense to him. He'd seen what happened when a community's trash built up faster than it could be collected. The streets didn't get dirty overnight, but give it enough time and the whole place would smell of rot. Think of it like a slow leak, Dr. Alvarez continued. You don't notice it at first. Then one day you look around and realize the damage has been happening all along. She paused, studying his face. That's why I'm glad you've been cutting back. It gives your liver breathing room to catch up. That night, Isaac couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, picturing his liver as a small, determined crew working on a conveyor belt, sorting out harmless materials from dangerous ones. He imagined the toxic pieces, tiny, sharp fragments, slipping through faster than the crew could remove them. No shouts of warning, no alarms, just quiet accumulation until the system faltered. The thought made his chest feel heavy. The next morning, as he sipped his tea, Isaac decided he needed to do more than just avoid harm. He needed to help his liver in whatever way he could. He spent the day reading, not medical journals, but articles written for everyday people like him. He learned that the liver could regenerate damaged cells, that it could recover if given the right conditions. That was both a comfort and a responsibility. In the afternoon, he went for a slow walk to the pier. The air smelled of salt and rain, the boards slick under his shoes. He thought about how much of his life had been built on routines he never questioned. Coffee in the morning, Tylenol when the aches came, a glass of wine with dinner. None of it had seemed harmful, but now he saw the invisible thread connecting those habits to his liver's constant labor. When he got home, Sarah was waiting with groceries. She set them on the counter and eyed him curiously. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Thinking about your liver again?" Isaac chuckled softly. "Always," he admitted. Then he told her about the toxic byproduct, how even a small part of what he took in could slowly build up. "It's like sweeping dust under the rug," he said. "One day you lift the rug and realize the whole floor is covered." Sarah listened intently, then reached into one of the grocery bags. She pulled out a bunch of fresh beets, deep red and earthy smelling. "Thought these might help your crew," she said with a smile. Isaac raised an eyebrow. She explained that she'd read about beets being good for the liver, full of compounds that could help it work more efficiently. He felt a swell of gratitude, not just for the beets, but for her care, her willingness to be part of this journey with him. That evening, he roasted the beets with olive oil and a sprinkle of salt. As he ate, he thought about how different this felt from swallowing a pill. This was nourishment, not a quick fix. It felt deliberate, like putting money into a savings account rather than paying off a debt. Over the next few days, Isaac began weaving in other small changes. More greens on his plate, water with lemon in the morning, less coffee, more herbal tea. None of it felt drastic, but each choice carried a quiet intention. Give the liver less to fight, more to work with. Still, there were moments when old habits called to him. On a chilly Saturday morning, his knees ached after working in the garden. He opened the cabinet and reached for the Tylenol without thinking. His fingers brushed the bottle, but then he stopped. He pictured that tiny, toxic sliver forming inside him, adding to the unseen pile. He closed the cabinet and went to warm a towel instead, draping it over his knees as he sat watching the rain. The pain didn't vanish, but it eased enough, and with it came a small wave of pride. One evening, George called to check in. Isaac told him about the byproduct, about how it worked, about the image of the overworked crew. "Never thought about it like that," George admitted. "Makes you realize your body's been bailing you out for years without you knowing." Isaac smiled at the truth in that. It was easy to think of his liver as something that belonged to him, but now he thought of it almost like a partner, one he'd neglected but was determined to make things right with. By the end of the month, Isaac noticed subtle shifts. His energy was steadier. The heaviness in his body seemed lighter. Even the yellow in his eyes had faded a little. He knew it was too soon for dramatic recovery, but these small signs felt like the first green shoots in spring, proof that life was stirring beneath the surface. And every time he thought of that toxic byproduct, every time he chose to give his liver a break, he felt that he was helping his silent crew work in cleaner, clearer air. It was work worth doing, quiet work, like the liver's own. It had been nearly 6 weeks since Isaac first learned the truth about Tylenol, and in that time, his habits had shifted in ways he wouldn't have thought possible. The bottle of little white tablets still sat in the back of the cabinet, but he rarely touched it. That small victory felt good, until a new realization began to creep in. If Tylenol could cause trouble for his liver, what about the other pain relievers he'd used over the years? The thought came one afternoon as he was reading in his armchair. A dull ache had settled in his lower back after hours of weeding in the garden the day before. Normally, he would have reached for ibuprofen or diclofenac, pills that had been his fallback for stiff joints and muscle aches, but this time he hesitated. He remembered Dr. Alvarez mentioning NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, during one of their talks. They can be hard on the liver too, especially if taken regularly, she had said. The next morning, Isaac brought the topic up at his checkup. So, ibuprofen, Voltaren, are they as bad as Tylenol? He asked, leaning forward in his chair. Dr. Alvarez gave a small nod. Different mechanism, similar risk. They're processed through the liver, and while occasional use is usually fine, long-term or high-dose use can raise the risk of injury. Sometimes the damage shows up quietly in blood tests before you feel any symptoms. Isaac felt a pang of unease. He thought of the half-empty blister packs in his bathroom drawer. He'd never taken them daily, but there had been stretches when he used them often, especially after a long day in the garden or a weekend helping Sarah with home repairs. That evening, Sarah stopped by with a basket of fresh bread from the bakery. As they sliced it in the kitchen, Isaac told her about his conversation with Dr. Alvarez. "I feel like I've been playing whack-a-mole," he said. "First Tylenol, now ibuprofen. Every time I think I found a safer option, it turns out it's not that safe after all." Sarah rested her hand on his arm. "It's not about never taking anything, Dad. It's about knowing when you really need it and giving your body a break the rest of the time." She was right, of course. He realized he'd been thinking in black and white terms, medicine as either good or bad. Now he saw it was more about balance, about knowing when the benefits outweighed the risks. Over the next few days, Isaac experimented with non-drug remedies for his aches. Warm compresses in the evening, short walks to loosen stiff muscles, light stretching in the mornings instead of his usual hurried start. At first, the relief was slow and modest compared to the instant comfort of a pill, but something unexpected happened. His patience grew. He learned to sit with mild discomfort instead of immediately trying to erase it. The more he practiced this, the less urgent his need for quick fixes became. One Sunday afternoon, his old friend George came by to return a borrowed book. They sat on the porch with cups of tea, watching gulls wheel over the water. George mentioned his bad shoulder acting up and how he'd been taking ibuprofen twice a day for weeks. Isaac told him what he'd learned from Dr. Alvarez, explaining how NSAIDs could sneak up on you. George frowned. "Never heard that before. I thought the only thing to watch for was your stomach." Isaac shook his head. "The liver's in the mix too. Sometimes it's the quiet damage you don't see coming." Later that evening, Isaac thought about how many people he knew who relied on these pain relievers without a second thought. They were as common in kitchen drawers as salt and pepper. He realized his own journey was becoming about more than just his liver. It was about awareness, and maybe in small ways he could pass that awareness on. At his next appointment, Dr. Alvarez suggested something new. "Keep a rotation," she advised. "If you need a pain reliever, don't use the same one every time. Give your liver and kidneys a break by alternating and use the smallest effective dose." Isaac wrote this down carefully in his notebook. He liked having a plan. It made him feel less like he was simply reacting and more like he was steering his own course. One rainy evening, Isaac was sorting through a box of old teaching supplies when he came across a lesson plan titled Hidden History. It was about the small, overlooked details in history that shaped big events. He smiled at the parallel. His liver journey felt like one long hidden history lesson, discovering the quiet forces working behind the scenes, the risks no one talked about at the dinner table. In the weeks that followed, Isaac continued to limit his use of NSAIDs. When pain came, he tried other methods first. If he truly needed a pill, he took it with a sense of intention, not habit. And each time, he pictured his liver as that quiet partner in the background, still working, still protecting him, but grateful for the lighter load. One night, as he was making tea before bed, Isaac caught his reflection in the kitchen window. The faint yellow in his eyes was nearly gone now. He knew there were still many steps ahead, many habits to refine, many quiet risks to uncover, but in that moment, he felt a sense of peace. The dark side of pain relievers no longer felt like an invisible threat. It was a challenge he could meet, one mindful choice at a time. Isaac had always thought of diclofenac, sold under brand names like Voltaren or Cataflam, as something a little different from the other pain relievers. It wasn't as common in his kitchen drawer as Tylenol or ibuprofen, but it had a reputation among his friends as the strong one. He used it sparingly over the years, usually when nothing else seemed to work. A few tablets here and there after an especially hard weekend in the garden or following a long day of helping Sarah rearrange furniture. But as he was sorting through his medications one rainy afternoon, he spotted an old blister pack of diclofenac tucked behind a bottle of vitamins. He turned it over in his hand, remembering Dr. Alvarez's warning about certain drugs that could be harder on the liver than others. Diclofenac had been on that list. The next day, he brought it to his appointment. "I don't take this often," he told her, laying the pack on her desk, "but should I even be keeping it?" Dr. Alvarez looked at the label and gave a small nod. "This one is a bit of a double-edged sword. It's very effective for inflammation and pain, but it carries a higher risk for liver injury than many other NSAIDs, especially if taken regularly or in high doses." Isaac frowned. "Even if I only use it occasionally?" She leaned forward. "Occasional use is much less risky, but here's the problem. When people have a strong painkiller on hand, it's easy to lean on it a little too often. And with diclofenac, even a few weeks of daily use can affect your liver enzymes. Sometimes the damage is mild and reversible, but I've also seen it get serious." Her words settled heavily on him. He thought about the times he had reached for diclofenac without much thought, trusting it to do the heavy lifting when milder pain relievers didn't cut it. He had never imagined that such small decisions could quietly chip away at the health of an organ he couldn't even feel. Later that evening, Sarah stopped by for dinner. Over roasted vegetables and warm bread, Isaac told her about his conversation with Dr. Alvarez. "It's like finding out your strongest soldier has a hidden weakness," he said. "You think it's the one that'll save you, but if you overuse it, it can turn on you." Sarah nodded slowly. "So what will you do with it?" He thought for a moment. "I'll keep it, but only for real emergencies. And I'll write the date on the pack so I know how long it's been sitting there." In the days that followed, Isaac began to pay closer attention to the little aches and twinges that used to send him searching for diclofenac. His knees still protested after long hours in the garden, his lower back still stiffened after bending over too long, but he found he could manage these discomforts in other ways. Heat packs, gentle stretches, shorter bouts of work with more breaks. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than risking his liver for temporary relief. One afternoon, his neighbor Tom stopped by to return a ladder. As they chatted in the driveway, Tom mentioned that he had been taking diclofenac daily for months because of shoulder pain. "Doctor gave me a prescription, so I figured it's safe," Tom said casually. Isaac felt a pang of concern. He shared what Dr. Alvarez had told him, not to scare Tom, but to make him aware. Tom's eyes widened. "No one ever mentioned the liver," he said quietly. "Guess I'll ask my doctor." That conversation stayed with Isaac. He realized how easily these silent risks could go unnoticed, even for people under medical care. Doctors were busy, patients trusted prescriptions, and most folks didn't think to question the quiet work their liver was doing in the background. At his next checkup, Isaac asked Dr. Alvarez about monitoring. "If I do take diclofenac for a few days, how will I know if it's affecting my liver?" She explained that mild damage might not cause symptoms right away. "That's why we use liver function tests, simple blood work. If you're going to use it regularly for more than a couple of weeks, it's smart to check those numbers." Her practical advice gave him a sense of control. He decided to keep his small supply of diclofenac in a clearly labeled container away from his everyday pain relievers as a reminder that it was for rare use only. One chilly morning, Isaac woke with a familiar ache in his shoulder, a leftover souvenir from moving Sarah's heavy bookcases last month. He glanced toward the cabinet where the diclofenac sat. For a moment, he felt the old pull of habit. But instead, he filled a hot water bottle, settled into his armchair, and waited. The ache eased enough for him to go about his day without the pill. It wasn't as instant as he'd once wanted, but it came with the quiet satisfaction of protecting his liver from unnecessary strain. That night, as he sat on the porch, watching the moonlight ripple over the waves, Isaac felt a small but solid sense of victory. He knew he would still face moments of temptation, still wrestle with the ease of quick fixes. But each time he chose patience and gentler remedies over the easy reach for diclofenac, it felt like another step in the right direction, one more act of care for the silent organ that had carried him this far. It was early summer when Isaac's thoughts turned from pain relievers to another category of medicine he had always trusted without question: antibiotics. He'd taken them at various points in his life, for a stubborn sinus infection in his 40s, a chest cold that wouldn't quit in his 50s, and once after a minor surgery. They had always been the cavalry arriving just in time, riding in to vanquish illness. But during a follow-up visit, Dr. Alvarez brought up a point that caught him off guard. "Some antibiotics are well known to cause liver stress, Isaac," she said gently. "Most people recover without lasting problems, but in some cases, they can cause serious injury. You've been careful with your pain relievers lately. Now it's time to think about these too." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "Even if I'm just taking them for a short time?" She nodded. "It's not as common as with pain relievers, but certain antibiotics can trigger an allergic-like reaction in the liver. And sometimes, if you're already on other medications or your liver is under strain, the effect can be much worse." Her words sparked an uneasy memory. About 6 years earlier, Isaac had come down with a bad chest infection. His doctor at the time prescribed a course of amoxicillin clavulanate. He remembered feeling grateful for the prescription, until a few days in, when he began to feel strangely fatigued with a dull ache under his ribs. At the time, he chalked it up to the infection itself, but now, with Dr. Alvarez's warning in mind, he wondered if the medication had played a part. That evening, he called Sarah. "Do you remember that winter I was so sick I could barely get out of bed?" he asked. She did. She had brought him soup and insisted he stay warm. "Why?" she asked. Isaac told her about the new connection he'd made. "I just never thought the medicine might have been adding to the problem," he admitted. "I thought it was all the illness." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Makes you wonder how many times our bodies are fighting two battles at once," she said finally. The next day, Isaac dug out an old folder of medical records. There, in faded ink, was the prescription from that winter. Seeing the name amoxicillin clavulanate on the page made the memory sharper. He recalled how the fatigue had lingered even after the infection cleared, how he'd felt off for weeks. No one had suggested checking his liver back then. It was just assumed he'd bounce back. Dr. Alvarez explained that this antibiotic, effective as it was also one of the leading causes of drug-induced liver injury in otherwise healthy people. "It's not about avoiding antibiotics entirely," she reassured him. "It's about being aware of which ones carry higher risks and making sure you have your liver monitored if you need them." From that point forward, Isaac decided he would always ask a few extra questions before starting any antibiotic. Was it absolutely necessary? Was there a lower risk option? Would his liver need monitoring during or after the course? These questions gave him a sense of agency he had never had before. He was no longer a passive recipient of treatment, but an informed partner in his care. One warm Saturday afternoon, George stopped by for tea. He mentioned having just finished a round of antibiotics for a tooth infection. "Wore me out," he said, rubbing his jaw. Isaac told him about his own past experience and Dr. Alvarez's warning. George frowned. "They didn't say anything about the liver," he muttered. Isaac shrugged. "Neither did mine back then, but now I ask." They sat quietly for a moment, listening to the distant hum of a boat engine out on the bay. George finally said, "I guess most of us just trust the prescription without thinking about what it's doing beyond fixing the problem we can see." Isaac nodded. "That's exactly it, but I'm starting to think we should trust and question at the same time." In the weeks that followed, Isaac became more mindful not just of the medicines he took, but of the conversations he had with his doctors. He felt less intimidated asking follow-up questions, less worried about seeming difficult. He realized that if a short conversation could prevent weeks or months of recovery from hidden damage, it was worth speaking up. One evening, Sarah joined him for dinner, bringing a loaf of crusty bread and a jar of local honey. Over the meal, Isaac told her about his new rule. He would never take a prescription without understanding exactly what it did, what risks it carried, and what he could do to protect his liver while on it. She smiled. "That's the teacher in you," she said. "You've turned it into a lesson plan for your own health." It was true. His liver journey was becoming less about avoiding harm and more about building a kind of curriculum for living wisely with the body he had. And every time he learned something new, like the hidden risks in certain antibiotics, it felt like he was adding another tool to a growing kit of self-protection. By midsummer, Isaac's perspective had shifted completely. Antibiotics were still the cavalry in his mind, but now he saw them as a cavalry that needed careful handling, one that could rescue him from danger, but might leave damage behind if not used wisely. He wasn't afraid of them, but he no longer saw them as harmless. And in that balance between trust and caution, he felt a deeper respect for the unseen work his liver did every day, even when the battle was on two fronts. Isaac had been taking his cholesterol medication for so many years that it had become as much a part of his morning routine as brushing his teeth. Every sunrise, without thinking, he reached for the little pill box by the kettle, swallowed the small tablet with his first sip of water, and moved on with his day. The bottle had changed design a few times over the years, the pharmacy labels came and went, but the ritual remained. He'd never questioned it. His doctor had prescribed statins, first simvastatin, then later atorvastatin, after a routine blood test showed his cholesterol creeping too high. "This will help protect your heart," the doctor had said back then, and it had. His cholesterol numbers dropped into the good range, and no one mentioned side effects beyond a vague warning about muscle aches. His liver? It never came up. That changed during one of his recent visits with Dr. Alvarez. They'd been talking about medications and liver health when she glanced at his chart and said, "I see you're still on atorvastatin." He nodded. "Every morning for years." She leaned back slightly, her voice calm but deliberate. "Statins are generally safe, Isaac, but they can sometimes affect liver function. For most people, the changes are mild and reversible. Still, we keep an eye on it, especially if you're on them long term." Isaac blinked. "You mean all this time I've been taking something that could be stressing my liver?" "It's possible," she said, "though not inevitable. But since you've been on them for over a decade, it's worth checking your liver enzymes regularly." Her words landed heavily. He thought about the morning ritual he'd followed for so long without a second thought. He'd been meticulous about taking the pill because he believed it was protecting his heart. Now he realized it might also be quietly demanding extra work from his liver. That evening, Isaac sat on his porch with a cup of chamomile tea, turning the idea over in his mind. He remembered when he'd first started on the medication, how reassured he'd felt knowing his cholesterol was being handled. But the thought that something designed to protect one part of his body could be taxing another felt unsettling. It was like hiring a watchman to guard your front door only to find out he occasionally left the back door unlocked. The next morning, he called Sarah. "Did you know cholesterol medicine can affect the liver?" he asked without preamble. She was surprised. "I thought it was just muscle pain people worried about." "That's what I thought too," Isaac said. "But apparently, it's more complicated than that." Sarah suggested he ask Dr. Alvarez if there were alternatives or if his dose could be adjusted. Isaac agreed, but he also knew he didn't want to make rash changes. The statin had been keeping his cholesterol under control for years. He didn't want to risk undoing that. Still, he was determined to explore ways to support his liver alongside the medication. At his next appointment, Dr. Alvarez reassured him that not everyone experienced liver strain from statins, and that if he had, it was likely mild. "The key," she explained, "is monitoring. We check your liver enzymes, watch for any symptoms, fatigue, dark urine, yellowing eyes, and if there's a problem, we can adjust or switch medications." That gave Isaac some peace of mind. He decided to focus on what he could control. He doubled down on the changes he'd already made. More greens on his plate, more water in his glass, less alcohol in his evenings. If his liver was working a little harder because of the statin, he would give it all the help he could. One Saturday morning, as he walked along the pier, he ran into George. They stopped to chat, and Isaac mentioned his latest revelation about statins and the liver. George raised his eyebrows. "I've been on those for years too, never once heard that." Isaac shrugged. "Neither had I until now. It's not about panic, it's about knowing so you can keep an eye on things." Over the following weeks, Isaac began to notice a shift in the way he thought about his health. It wasn't about fearing every pill or distrusting every prescription. It was about staying awake, about knowing that every choice, even the routine ones, had ripples. He realized he didn't have to abandon the tools that had helped him. He just had to respect the balance between help and harm. One rainy evening, Sarah joined him for dinner. As they sat at the table, Isaac told her he'd decided to keep taking his statin, but also to get regular liver tests, just to be sure. "It's like checking the oil in your car," he said with a small smile. "Doesn't mean you think the engine's broken. Just means you're making sure it stays running smooth." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You've become the most careful patient I've ever known," she teased. Isaac chuckled. "Careful, maybe, but also grateful. My liver's been working overtime for years without me knowing. The least I can do is check in on it now and then." And so the pill box by the kettle stayed. Each morning, Isaac still took his little white tablet with a sip of water. But now he did it with awareness, an unspoken nod to the quiet worker inside him that kept going day after day without complaint. He knew that as long as he stayed mindful, he could protect both his heart and his liver. And that, he thought, was a balance worth keeping. It was a breezy autumn afternoon when Isaac sat in Dr. Alvarez's office for what he thought would be a routine checkup. The leaves outside rustled in soft waves, and a shaft of golden light stretched across her desk. They had already discussed his statin use and the plan to keep monitoring his liver. He felt reassured by that. But as she scanned his chart, her eyes paused on another line of medication, amiodarone. Isaac had been prescribed amiodarone years earlier after a series of irregular heartbeats left him dizzy and winded. The drug had worked wonders. It kept his rhythm steady, the frightening episodes at bay. In his mind, it was a lifeline. He never thought of it as dangerous. Dr. Alvarez looked up, her expression calm but deliberate. "Isaac, I want to talk about your heart medicine for a moment. Amiodarone is very effective for arrhythmias, but it comes with some important cautions. One of them is the liver." Isaac blinked. "The liver again?" "Yes," she said gently. "In many patients, long-term use of amiodarone can cause changes in liver enzymes. Sometimes these changes are mild and temporary, but in rare cases, they can be more serious. That's why we keep you on regular blood tests." He leaned back in his chair, letting her words sink in. "So, every day I take it, I'm asking my liver to work harder?" "In a way," she nodded. "It's a strong medication, and like all strong medicines, it demands extra processing from the liver. You've been tolerating it well so far, but it's something we have to respect." That night, Isaac sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the little white amiodarone tablets in his hand. He thought about the years he'd been taking them without question, grateful for the stability they gave his heart. He remembered the days before the prescription, how the sudden rush of palpitations would leave him gripping the edge of the table, afraid to move. The relief of having those episodes under control had been worth everything. But now he saw it differently. His heart medicine wasn't just protecting one part of him, it was quietly adding strain to another. And that meant his job wasn't simply to take it faithfully. It was to balance its benefits with care for the rest of his body. The next morning, he called Sarah. "Did you know my heart medicine can be tough on the liver?" he asked. She hesitated. "No, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised anymore. Seems like every pill has a hidden price." He laughed softly. "That's exactly what it feels like. A price. The trick is deciding when it's worth paying." Isaac brought the topic up again at his next visit. "If I stopped taking it, would my heart be okay?" he asked Dr. Alvarez. She shook her head. "That's not an option right now. It's keeping your rhythm steady. But there are things we can do to minimize the liver's burden. Regular testing, careful attention to symptoms, and making sure you're not combining it with other medications that increase the risk." He nodded. "So it's not about quitting, it's about partnering with the medicine in a smarter way." "Exactly," she said with a smile. In the weeks that followed, Isaac became even more attentive to his routines. He kept his water intake high, gave up his occasional glass of wine altogether, and stayed committed to the fresh, whole foods he'd been adding to his diet. He knew these changes wouldn't erase the medicine's demands on his liver, but they could help his body meet them without faltering. One chilly evening, as he and George sat in the small cafe near the pier, Isaac shared what he'd learned about amiodarone. George raised his eyebrows. "I thought heart medicine was the safest thing you could take because it's for your heart." Isaac smiled faintly. "That's the thing. It is safe for the heart, but the liver still has to clean it up. It's like hiring someone to fix your roof, but they track mud through the whole house on their way in." George chuckled at the image, but he looked thoughtful. "Guess that means we should be grateful for the cleanup crew." Isaac nodded. "Exactly. And make sure we're not making their job harder." Over time, Isaac came to see his amiodarone tablets differently. They weren't just a lifeline for his heart, they were also a responsibility. Taking them meant taking on the duty of protecting his liver from unnecessary strain so the two could work in harmony rather than at odds. One evening, as he prepared his pill box for the week, Isaac paused for a moment. He touched the small compartment where his amiodarone tablets sat and thought of his heartbeat, steady and reliable now thanks to them. Then he thought of his liver, still quietly processing each dose, still doing its tireless work. He felt a deep gratitude for both and a renewed determination to care for them equally. Isaac had always thought of supplements as the safe side of health. In his mind, they were the gentle cousins of medicine, harmless powders, capsules, and teas meant to support the body rather than fight disease. He'd never looked at a bottle of vitamins with suspicion. Why would he? They came with pictures of leaves and sunshine on the label, promising strength, energy, and vitality. For years, his kitchen cupboard had held a small but steady collection: a multivitamin for general health, a turmeric capsule for his joints, milk thistle because he'd heard it was good for the liver, and an occasional green tea extract for its supposed antioxidant boost. None of these had ever been prescribed. They were simply things he'd picked up after hearing about them from friends, reading an article online, or catching a segment on the evening news. But during a late autumn visit, Dr. Alvarez brought up something that made him sit a little straighter. She was reviewing his blood work and the list of everything he was taking when she asked, "Isaac, are you still using that green tea extract?" He nodded. "Most mornings. Why?" She hesitated for just a moment before explaining. Some supplements, even ones that seem completely natural, can be surprisingly hard on the liver. Green tea extract in concentrated form has been linked to liver injury in certain cases, especially when taken daily for long periods. Isaac blinked. "You're telling me my liver-friendly tea might actually be unfriendly?" "In high doses, yes," she said gently. "And it's not just green tea extract. Some bodybuilding supplements, high-dose niacin, herbal remedies like kava or black cohosh, they've all been linked to liver problems. Most people do fine with moderate use, but the liver still has to process everything you take in, natural or not." Her words unsettled him. He had always thought the divide was clear. Medicine could carry risks, nature was safe. But now that line blurred. He realized that the liver didn't care whether something came from a laboratory or a plant. If it needed breaking down, the liver had to do the work, and too much work from any source could still cause harm. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table with his supplements lined up in front of him. He turned each bottle in his hands, reading the fine print the way he'd learned to do with his medications. Some listed exact doses, others had vague measurements like proprietary blend. That phrase suddenly felt less like a mark of expertise and more like a locked door. What was actually inside and in what amount? The next day, Sarah came by for lunch and found him deep in thought, the bottle still spread across the table. "Planning to open a health shop, Dad?" she teased. He smiled faintly. "Planning to figure out if I've been helping or hurting myself." He explained what Dr. Alvarez had told him about supplements and liver health. Sarah's expression shifted from amused to concerned. "I guess it's like too much of anything," she said. "Even water can be dangerous if you overdo it." Isaac nodded. "Exactly. I just never thought I'd have to be this cautious with things I thought were harmless." He decided to pare down his collection. The green tea extract went straight into the bin. He kept the multivitamin but cut back to every other day. The turmeric capsule stayed, but he chose to get most of his anti-inflammatory benefits from fresh ginger and turmeric in his cooking. It felt strange to clear away things he'd once believed were helping him, but the act left him with a sense of lightness. In the weeks that followed, Isaac began to notice something subtle. Without the green tea extract, his energy was still steady. His digestion even felt calmer. It reminded him of what Dr. Alvarez had said about the liver, how sometimes less work meant better performance. One evening, George stopped by for tea. When Isaac offered him a turmeric ginger blend he'd brewed himself, George laughed. "No fancy pills this time?" Isaac grinned. "Nope, I'm sticking closer to food. At least my liver knows what to do with a carrot or a piece of ginger." They sat together, sipping in companionable silence. Isaac thought about how much his understanding had shifted over the past months. He had started this journey thinking it was about cutting out dangerous drugs, but it was just as much about looking at the small, everyday things he put in his body, things he'd trusted without question. At his next checkup, Dr. Alvarez smiled when she heard about the changes. "You're treating your liver like a valued guest instead of a garbage disposal," she said warmly. "That's the difference." Isaac left the clinic that day feeling quietly proud. He had learned to see past labels, past marketing, past his own long-held assumptions. And in doing so, he was giving his liver a gift it had been quietly asking for all along: less to fight, more room to thrive. Isaac had come a long way in understanding his liver's silent work and the risks hidden in the medicines and supplements he'd taken for years. Yet one question still lingered. How would he know if his liver was struggling again? How could he recognize the subtle signs before it became serious? One afternoon, as he sipped chamomile tea by the window, he found himself recalling the first moments of his own journey, the faint yellow in his eyes, the tiredness he had brushed aside. Those early signs had been easy to miss, or worse, easy to explain away as simple fatigue or the toll of age. It was that realization that brought a new urgency to his learning. At his next visit, Isaac asked Dr. Alvarez directly, "What should I watch for? What are the early signs of liver trouble?" She smiled gently, glad for the question. Liver disease often starts quietly. Many people don't feel anything at all at first. But there are subtle clues, things like unusual fatigue, loss of appetite, mild nausea, or discomfort in the upper right abdomen. Isaac listened carefully as she described how the skin and eyes might start to yellow, jaundice, as bilirubin builds up in the blood. You might notice dark urine, pale stools, or itching, she added. Sometimes a rash or swelling can appear too. These signs don't always come together, and not everyone has all of them, but they're important warnings. That night, Isaac sat quietly in his armchair, thinking over the list. It was a kind of checklist for vigilance, simple, everyday changes that could mean something serious if ignored. He thought back to the weeks before his diagnosis, how he'd felt tired and a bit off, but never worried enough to see a doctor. Maybe if he'd known then what he knew now, things could have been different. Over the next days, Isaac became more attuned to his body's whispers. He paid attention to the mornings when his energy lagged more than usual, to the times when his stomach felt unsettled after meals. He learned not to dismiss these moments as mere signs of aging, but to note them as signals worth tracking. Sarah noticed the change too. During their evening calls, she'd ask, "How are you feeling today? Any new aches or tiredness?" It wasn't a daily interrogation, but a gentle check-in that kept Isaac mindful. One afternoon, as he prepared a light lunch, Isaac felt a strange itch across his arms. It wasn't severe, but it was persistent enough to catch his attention. He remembered Dr. Alvarez's words and made a mental note. That evening, he texted Sarah, "Got a little itch today, nothing major, but keeping an eye." She replied quickly, "Good idea. Sometimes the little things matter most." When he saw Dr. Alvarez again, he mentioned the itching. She smiled reassuringly. Sometimes it can be related to liver issues, but it can also be from dry skin or allergies. We'll keep monitoring, but it's good you're paying attention. That exchange deepened Isaac's resolve. He understood now that early signs might be subtle and easy to overlook, but catching them early could make all the difference. It was about building a partnership with his body, listening without fear, watching without anxiety. One morning, Isaac awoke feeling unusually weak. His legs wobbled slightly as he got out of bed, and a wave of nausea washed over him. Alarmed, he called Sarah, who urged him to see Dr. Alvarez immediately. At the clinic, blood tests showed some elevation in his liver enzymes, signaling increased stress. The episode was a reminder that despite all his efforts, his liver was still vulnerable and that vigilance must never wane. Over the next weeks, Isaac focused even more on rest, hydration, and gentle nutrition. He attended his regular blood tests, eager for reassurance that his liver was stabilizing. Each clear result was a small victory, a marker of progress on a long journey. At home, he made a habit of jotting down any unusual symptoms, fatigue, changes in appetite, skin changes, in a small journal. It was his way of staying connected to his health story, one observation at a time. As the months passed, Isaac's awareness became a quiet part of his daily rhythm, as natural as his morning tea or his evening walks. He knew that liver health was a lifelong commitment, and early signs were his early warnings, opportunities to act before problems grew. One evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Isaac felt a deep sense of gratitude. His liver had been silent for so long, working tirelessly without complaint. Now he was finally listening, and in listening, he had found a new kind of strength. Isaac never imagined that the quiet vigilance he'd cultivated over months would suddenly be tested in such a stark way. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A fatigue deeper than usual settled over him, wrapping his limbs in heaviness. His appetite dwindled further, and a faint, persistent discomfort tugged beneath his ribs on the right side. He told himself to rest more, to drink extra water, to trust that these moments would pass. But the yellow tint in his eyes, the same shade he'd feared months ago, reappeared, more noticeable this time. One evening, as he struggled to stand after dinner, Sarah insisted he call Dr. Alvarez immediately. The concern in her voice carried weight he could no longer ignore. "Dad, some symptoms need urgent care. This isn't the time to wait and see." His hesitation dissolved under her insistence, and with shaky hands, he dialed the clinic. At the hospital, the doctors moved quickly. Tests confirmed his liver was in distress, an acute flare that demanded immediate attention. Isaac lay in the sterile hospital bed, the hum of machines filling the quiet room. His heart pounded, not just from the diagnosis, but from the sudden realization that despite all his care and effort, his liver was still fragile, still fighting a battle he'd glimpsed only in moments before. Dr. Alvarez appeared, her familiar calm presence a balm in the storm. She explained that sometimes, despite vigilance and lifestyle changes, the liver could suddenly deteriorate. Drug-induced hepatitis, acute injury triggered by medications or supplements, or the culmination of years of strain. "It's a race," she said softly. "A race against time to support your liver before damage becomes irreversible." Isaac's thoughts turned to all the pills he'd carefully rationed, the supplements he'd stopped, the lifestyle he'd adjusted. He wondered if he'd missed a warning, a sign that might have saved him from this crisis. But Dr. Alvarez reassured him that these episodes were unpredictable. The key was swift action now, and his willingness to fight. The hospital stay was a blur of monitoring, medication adjustments, and cautious optimism. Family visits brought comfort and strength, especially Sarah's steady presence. Isaac found solace in small victories, the easing of pain, the gradual return of color to his skin, the quiet beats of hope in his chest. This ordeal deepened Isaac's respect for his liver's resilience and his own capacity to respond under pressure. He realized that awareness was not just about prevention, but also about recognizing when urgent care was necessary. The liver might be silent in its suffering, but the body spoke in moments of crisis, and listening meant acting without delay. As he recovered, Isaac made a silent vow to carry this lesson forward, to continue his journey with humility, patience, and unwavering attention. The road ahead would be long, but he no longer walked it alone. He had learned to trust his body's signals and the support of those who cared for him. After his hospital stay, Isaac returned home with a new perspective, one shaped by experience, uncertainty, and a deepened commitment to his health. The weeks of monitoring and treatment had left him physically weaker but emotionally stronger. He understood now that protecting his liver wasn't just about avoiding certain medications or supplements. It was about embracing a lifestyle that honored the delicate balance within his body every single day. Sarah became his steadfast companion in this journey. Together, they created a plan, not a strict regimen, but a flexible set of guiding principles. They filled the kitchen with fresh fruits and vegetables, lean proteins, and whole grains. Isaac found joy in cooking again, experimenting with herbs and spices that brought flavor and nourishment without taxing his liver. Meals became moments of care, not just routine. Isaac also renewed his commitment to gentle movement. His daily walks along the pier became a sacred ritual, a time to breathe deeply and connect with the rhythm of life around him. Some days were easier than others, but each step was a small victory. He also began practicing light stretching and breathing exercises recommended by a physical therapist, all aimed at supporting his overall well-being without overexertion. Hydration took on new importance. Isaac kept a large glass of water by his chair throughout the day, sipping mindfully. He had given up his occasional glass of wine, a difficult but necessary sacrifice. It wasn't about deprivation, it was about choosing life-affirming habits that allowed his liver to heal and thrive. He stayed in close contact with Dr. Alvarez, who continued to monitor his liver function with regular blood tests. Each time he received a stable report, a wave of relief washed over him, a reminder that his efforts were bearing fruit. Yet Isaac knew the journey was ongoing. Healing was not a destination, but a daily practice, a dance between care and caution. Isaac also found unexpected comfort in community. He joined a local support group for people managing chronic health conditions. Sharing stories, listening to others' challenges and triumphs, he realized he was not alone. The group became a source of encouragement, a place where he could speak openly about his fears and hopes. It reminded him that health was not a solitary endeavor, but a shared journey. One afternoon, as autumn leaves swirled outside, Isaac sat with Sarah on the porch. The conversation turned to the future, what lay ahead, what he hoped for. Isaac spoke of gratitude for the lessons learned, for the quiet resilience of his liver, and for the chance to continue living with intention. Sarah smiled. "You've come so far, Dad. Your story isn't just about illness, it's about courage and care. You're teaching all of us what it means to listen to our bodies." Isaac felt a deep warmth in her words. He knew that protecting his liver was protecting his life, a life filled with moments to cherish, people to love, and stories yet to write. Isaac sat by the window on a crisp morning, a notebook open on his lap. Months of learning, adjusting, and listening had culminated in a simple but powerful realization. Managing his liver health meant managing his relationship with medications and supplements carefully and thoughtfully. He wanted to capture all he had learned, not just for himself, but for anyone who might walk a similar path. He began jotting down a checklist, a set of guiding principles born from experience rather than theory. First, always read labels carefully, not just the brand name or the front of the bottle, but the fine print that revealed what was really inside. It was easy to overlook acetaminophen hiding in cold remedies or multiple supplements stacked in the cabinet. Awareness was the first step to safety. Next, Isaac wrote, "Never exceed recommended doses." Even medicines that seemed harmless could become dangerous if taken in excess or combined unknowingly. He recalled the many warnings Dr. Alvarez had shared, how a single overdose of Tylenol could cause severe liver damage, how regular use of NSAIDs like diclofenac could silently harm the organ over time. He added a reminder to ask questions of doctors, pharmacists, and family. No question was too small or too silly when it came to health. Isaac remembered how empowering it felt to learn about the risks of antibiotics and heart medications simply by asking. It was a way of taking ownership of his care, becoming an active participant rather than a passive recipient. Another crucial point on the list was keep regular checkups and liver function tests. The blood work was a quiet guardian, revealing what symptoms could not. It was a way to catch problems early before they became crises. Isaac's own experience with acute liver stress had taught him that vigilance could save lives. He also noted the importance of balancing medications with lifestyle choices. Good nutrition, hydration, gentle exercise, and rest were not optional extras, but essential partners in liver health. They were the foundation that supported the body's ability to heal and thrive amidst the demands of medicine. Finally, Isaac penned a reminder to listen to your body, to honor its signals, however subtle. Fatigue, jaundice, itching, pain, or changes in appetite were not nuisances to dismiss, but messages to heed. Early action could make all the difference. As he closed the notebook, Isaac felt a deep sense of peace. His journey had been long and challenging, filled with moments of uncertainty and fear, but it had also been filled with growth, connection, and newfound respect for the silent work his liver performed every day. He knew the road ahead was still unfolding. New medicines, new challenges, new lessons would come. But armed with this checklist, with the support of loved ones and trusted healthcare providers, Isaac was ready. He was no longer afraid, not because the risks had vanished, but because he had learned to meet them with knowledge, care, and resilience. In the quiet morning light, Isaac smiled. Protecting his liver was protecting his life, and in that act of protection, he found not just survival, but hope, and the promise of many more sunrises to come. Isaac's journey shows us how quietly and steadily the liver works behind the scenes, carrying the burden of every pill, supplement, and choice we make. From his first shock at discovering the hidden dangers of common medications like Tylenol and diclofenac, to his growing awareness of how even natural supplements can strain this vital organ, Isaac learned to listen deeply to his body's signals. He faced moments of fear when subtle signs became urgent warnings, and moments of hope as small changes brought gradual healing. Through it all, Isaac transformed from a passive patient into an empowered partner in his health. He embraced balance, asked questions, and honored the silent work of his liver with patience and care. For all of us watching today, Isaac's story is a gentle reminder. Our bodies speak in whispers long before they shout. Paying attention to those early signs, understanding the true impact of what we take into our bodies, and choosing wisely can protect us from serious harm. It's never too late to start this journey. If you're over 50, Take a moment today to review your medications and supplements. Talk openly with your healthcare providers. Make small but meaningful changes. Drink more water, eat nourishing foods, move gently, and rest deeply. Your liver, that tireless guardian of your health, deserves your respect and care. Remember, protecting your liver is protecting your life. Like Isaac, you have the power to listen, learn, and act, because every small step you take is a gift of health and hope for the years ahead. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and most importantly, stay well.